Both timbers toppled, and now I'm back on the Wrestling Roundtable to talk about the one thing I like more than logging, indie wrestling.
Today on the Wrestling Roundtable, independent wrestling and the career of The Undertaker. Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. I'm the host, Eric Santamaria. I've been working in wrestling 7.5 years, but I've been a fan of 23 years. And joining the panel today, we've got 4 wrestlers. No, wait, that's 3? Actually, I'm the intergender Jello wrestling champion, a la Andy Kaufman. A note on that, I only wrestle in red Jello, so that way the marks won't know when the opponent is on the rag. But no, really, we've got 3 independent wrestlers here, and I'm very happy to have all of you on because we've actually been working together on and off for many years. I told you Wrestling Roundtable was an inside job. Now you know it's true. But it's great to have independent wrestlers here because that's actually the subject because you are here. Independent wrestling, and I know there's lots of people who watch the show, and even though they're on the internet, are still kind of marky, not smart mark, and they hate indie wrestling. But you know what? Independent wrestling is where a lot of people come from. Some of your favorites right now on TV, and we wouldn't have some of the stars that we do today without it. So be open-minded and listen to what some of our independent wrestlers have to say. Introducing the panel, to my left, which is your right, Grizzly Redwood. He's been a wrestler 6.5 years, but he's been watching for 15. Sitting to my right, which is your left, also coming back just like Grizzly Redwood did, but for the first time this season, Alex Payne, the Psycho, American Psycho, excuse me, been wrestling 6.5 years as well, also trained under Austin Aries just like Grizzly Redwood, but you've been watching wrestling a lot longer than that, 24 years. And also returning to the panel for the first time this season is Shane Hagadorn. Been wanting to get you back on for a long time. How many good conversations do we have about wrestling like weekly? Yeah. And it's so fleeting. So yeah. I'm glad to
glad to be back.
Yes,
it's been a while.
It has been since 2009, I think.
Japan?
Yeah, so I'm glad to have you back on. And you have been watching wrestling for 25 years, but I don't know what to say about how long you've been wrestling because you've been wrestling a long time up until about this year, and then what happened?
Recently diagnosed with a degenerative disc disease in my lower back, as well as 2 bulging discs in my lower back and another bulging disc in the cervical area of my spine, which is up by my shoulder blades. So I don't know if I'd say that puts an end to my in-ring wrestling career, but at least on a definitive hiatus.
Well, I know that you still at least plan on managing on the Indies.
Yeah.
And it really sucks to hear that. It's not quite unlike what happened with Edge last year, where the injuries just started building up to the point where if he keeps wrestling, it's going to essentially cripple him. Yeah. Is that your case too?
More or less what I was told. And I mean, if I was making Edge money, I probably would still do it. It's not worth it right now. So, I mean, I had my first round of steroid injections into my back last week, which helped alleviate it somewhat. We'll see if that helps. I mean, I don't want to have to say goodbye to the physical wrestling like this. I mean, if nothing else, I'd like to be able to at least get to a point where I can have one more match and just officially end it my way.
Well, on the bright side, there's 2 things. One, you're not Buff Bagwell and Sabu. Yeah. So at least you're not in that shape. And we want to wish best wishes to Buff Bagwell and Sabu, who are in the hospital right now for 2 different incidents. So at least you're not that bad. Yeah. At least you can sit here and be of sound mind. The other bright side is, hey, if Ring of Honor is a Hall of Fame, that means you get inducted automatically, doesn't it? Just based on Edge. I mean, we do like to make jokes about it, but that is a really shitty situation, and it does suck. And don't take the ROH Hall of Fame thing too lightly. You managed more wrestlers to championship belts in Ring of Honor than anybody, so everyone likes to look at, let's say, the late Larry Sweeney or Prince Nana. Nana never managed a champion, and John Walters doesn't count because he won the belt before he sold out to the embassy. So you do have that credential at least going for you, and we do wish you the best of luck, and we look forward to seeing you some more, like in PWX maybe, or somewhere else.
That one.
Managing hopefully in the future. But that is another independent wrestling organization, and that's what we're here to talk about. And what's interesting about the Indies to me is it seems like they sprung up, let's say around just about the Monday Night War or before. That's really when Indies started becoming about, because it seems like once the territories died, you look at the map on WWE DVDs with all the different territories and how many lasted at that point. Like AWA's gone, World Class is gone, Portland is like a ghost town because of the drug testing, Florida Championship Wrestling, etc. This is all gone now. And we're left with WCW, WWF, ECW as it would become later on. And I also wanted to clarify, speaking of ECW, I don't really want to necessarily concentrate too much on some of the bigger indies like ECW or ROH, because certainly they started small like everybody does. But they can be subjects in and of themselves, so I don't want to eat too much time with them. But what I was getting at with the territories is the territories die. And I remember asking Bryan Danielson once, how does he feel about indies right now? Do you think these are the modern equivalent of territories? Because he was like, well, if I go to Memphis, which lasted USWA, that's a different crowd than if I go to Philadelphia, or if I go to Puerto Rico or Japan. So it's kind of like the same idea where you would travel to different places and get different reactions from different people. So do you think indies are the modern equivalent of territories?
Yes, like you said, you give someone who might wrestle primarily in the Northeast, you might get used to wrestling simply in front of the Philadelphia crowd, which in itself could be different. If you're wrestling for the arena crowd, you got some very rabid, snobby type wrestling fans that they want to see you kill yourself left and right. Or you could travel to the Midwest and wrestle in Chicago, and they like a little bit of everything, and they want to be entertained. They like good wrestling. You can go down to, like Brian was saying, in Memphis, and that crowd's going to react more towards how you react to them than how many moves you actually do. You learn how to sample what wrestler you actually are from going to different wrestling company, wrestling promotion, indie promotion, whatever, kind of the same way you would back in the day with territories.
Well, you got firsthand experience when you were younger, before you became a wrestler, checking out some of these indies. So what was your first impression of independent wrestling? Because some people, like I mentioned before, aren't open-minded to it. They like the big pyro and the screens and the flash from TV, and when they see that, they're already prejudging the action before it even begins. Like, oh, this is small time.
I started late watching indie wrestling. I didn't start watching indie wrestling until around mid-2005, because I just got bored with what I was watching on TV. And I was down in Southern Maryland and checked a little places out down there that really was just a bunch of guys who put on shorts and T-shirts and were like, we're wrestlers now.
There was a big period of time around that time when it was trash bag, backyard-looking sort of indies.
Even like me being on the outside looking in, could just tell the quality wasn't there. My first big indie show was a Ring of Honor show. And something like that, just without the big production, just the quality wrestling just kind of blew me away.
A lot of impressions are made from that. Like the wrestling spoke for itself, not so much the pomp and circumstance. So was that what appealed to you in terms of becoming a wrestler, making that leap? Because everyone's got to start somewhere, and there's not a Tough Enough every week. So is that something that was impressed on you where, oh, Ring of Honor's got a reputation, I got to go over there? Or was there another school you considered?
I first considered Shawn Michaels Wrestling School. I was going to drop out of college after my freshman year and go to Shawn Michaels Wrestling School. So that would have been like 98, 99. So I'm not sure if that would have been the same time as Brian or Paul London, but it was that same time frame. But I agreed to finish school and then go to wrestling school. In the interim, I went to one of my first indie shows was, I think PWF maybe, at the LA Globe in Lansing, Michigan. And on that show were Jimmy Jacobs on a pogo stick wearing a Cat in the Hat, Dr. Seuss style hat.
Not much has changed.
Punk and Cabana, and another guy from the Midwest named Gavin Starr. That was my first real exposure to indie wrestling. Fast forward a couple years, and I find out about Ring of Honor, and I see that Punk's running the school. And it was more like I knew the quality that came with Ring of Honor. If they ever open a school, that's where I'm going to go. And so it was more because I knew the quality of wrestling that Ring of Honor produced. And I finally was like, all right, that's where I'm going to go.
Word of mouth, at least especially in the time before the internet, was a big deal. Because especially when you would read about Sabu, let's say, in Pro Wrestling Illustrated in the mid-'90s or early '90s, that's how we got a lot of his name. Tape trading and magazine sort of coverage. Like, you hear Sabu, he's doing all this stuff. I got to see that. And that's how reputations were made, a lot of word of mouth. Or can't underestimate the power of television advertising either. If you buy a $700 TV slot during Raw for your local NWA, maybe you'll get some people to come out and give it a chance.
I think that's actually how I found out about that first PWF show I went to, is they had an ad during Raw or SmackDown, one of them. And it was, oh, let's go.
And speaking of the Shawn Michaels School, a lot of these places like Booker T has his own indie based off of that.
Not to knock on Indy, you have people that knock independence. Well, you need a place where your students, where these veterans make wrestling schools and build them, and they comprise their own students. They need a place to go out there and try out their craft. You can't always have an OVW that's established or an FCW that's established by a top company like WWE. You have to have some of these veterans go out and have their own schools and put on their own shows and kind of show their craft and their wrestlers to kind of hone their craft in front of somebody. If you have someone going onto WWE's door and knocking, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to go through some sort of system. You have to go through a school, and you have to learn one way or another.
You need somebody credible to learn from. You have to, because that's the one bad thing about like indie wrestling. There's too many places that aren't reputable, that have people running in that probably shouldn't be running in at all. Somewhere to learn from that is great. I learned a lot through Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Like, I never traded tapes. I had a home computer with old dial-up that I didn't really even bother with.
How long did we have to sit to download a song of an NWO bootleg?
I didn't even bother with any of that. Like, I learned a lot through Pro Wrestling Illustrated as far as all independent wrestling that I picked up from that. A good place to learn is like the most important thing. That's the one problem with indie wrestling, is there's too much schleppiness out there.
Guys who are teaching who've probably been wrestling like a week.
Yeah, it's bad.
It's embarrassing.
A good place to learn, I guess, was the ROH school, which led to Pro Wrestling Respect, which you can download at gfl.tv and find out more on ProWrestlingRespect.com. I don't know why I'd plug it. We only co-produced it, but if you want to see what the ROH school and Wrestling Roundtable did together, I thought it was pretty good. But there is good and bad to everything, and I want to throw it to you because you've had, I guess, the most experience all over the world going to Pro Wrestling Noah and back. So you've been all over the place since you came back too. CZW, NWA Force One, up and down the East Coast. So what are some of the pros and cons of indie wrestling?
You go to a smaller show, the paydays suck. You go to a bigger show, it's awesome. But when you first start off, you piggyback on what wrestlers are going to what shows, or you piggyback on your friends because they're booked.
Still piggybacking on
We all still do to a degree.
Always
That's
pack
right.
with your gear. You
Always
never
pack
know.
with your gear, because an opportunity may come. There's your pro right there. The con is, well, you travel 200 miles, spent money on gas and food, and you're
Here's
not
$5.
or you're not even getting a
Right.
match. Much like it said in wrestling, nothing's guaranteed. So you have those problems. Then you have, you're booked 1 month, and then the next month you're not booked for whatever reason, budget or this or that. Okay, or you show up to the building and, I forgot to tell you, you're not booked today. Really, some of these promoters, they don't have the common sense to be businessmen and go, hey, look, I'm going to give you a call and tell you, hey, you're not showing up. Fortunately, I've dealt with some pretty business-savvy people, or at least
Not dicks.
not complete dicks, that can go, hey, look, I can't pay you, I don't want to offend you, or, hey, look, I don't have a spot for you because the budget's kind of cut.
Not the kind of promoter that ducks out before he has to pay everything.
Oh, there's been those guys too, trust me.
You used one of the operative words that me and Eric were just talking about earlier in the week.
Eric and I.
Business.
Yeah.
Well, grammar police.
Technically, it's Eric.
English major.
You use one of the words that is most appropriate is business, because ultimately that's what it should be treated like for all of us, and most people don't treat it like a business.
I definitely did not come into pro wrestling thinking I was going to be my own businessman.
Yeah.
Like that's something you kind of got to learn on the fly.
You become your own promoter, you become your own advertiser,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
market yourself the whole time, and you have to put your own self-worth out there. If you're good at marketing yourself, you can go really far. If you take the time to go out and learn as much as possible you can go far. But there's also guys that you see, who we've seen, that come set up at shows, that travel, 2-3 hours to just get a shot at a Ring of Honor dark match. They're going to travel from Tennessee or whatever to set up in Dayton, Ohio, and there's that chance that they're not going to get paid or they're not going to wrestle, but they're there just to make connections. So you got to look at, maybe that's a pro, but then you can look at it as a con too.
I did not mind driving anywhere for little or no money as long as I took some experience and something to learn with out of it. Like that was really all that mattered. And that's important starting out too. Like,
You got to be humble.
Yeah, you got to get good, right? And you're only going to get good by wrestling. And a con to that is people willing to work for free or for selling tickets or for what I consider garbage reason like that. takes away from all the people who are quality and who are professionals and like to handle themselves like
Well,
professionals.
look at how they look too. For one, you have people that do sell the tickets, wrestle for free, and they don't look like pro wrestlers. They don't have good gear. The training was poor at best.
Well, we'll have more bitching when we come back. Independent wrestling on Wrestling Roundtable. More when we return.
Obama doesn't got horns, but he's the devil.
Oh boy!
Oh, brother! You know he's
Just
Malcolm
saying
X's
these
son. You guys believe in ghosts?
I felt bad for the audience today. I mean, I can't say I know everything that's going on in wrestling because I don't pay attention. I'd rather jerk off, you know? I mean, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, but I mean,
That's
I'd rather
just-
jerk off than do most things.
Yeah. Jerking off is fun.
Frankie Kazarian's got an awesome story about ghosts, and the fucking Young Bucks grew up in a haunted house.
And we're getting this reaction, and we're sensing this and thinking, man, these people really love this guy and everything. How fun would it be if we just beat the fuck out of him, just turn on him right now? And I go, that would be awesome. And then we look at Teddy and go, hey, what do you think? We're going to fucking turn on you. And he goes, yeah, hey, go do a backflip. Once you land, we're going to fuck you up. All right.
Dude, I swear somebody was fucking murdered doing dishes at my house. Because every time I do dishes, I just feel horrible inside of my house.
You sure that's not just something inside you wanting your wife to do the dishes?
That's what Taylor says. And she just don't want to do dishes. No, I did dishes for a fucking living. I've done dishes. It sucks, but it doesn't make me want to cry. Somebody got fucking murdered at our house, man. And so yeah, Joan Benet Ramsey wound up becoming what is today Lady Gaga.
Hey, well, that is just
No. I knew it would be funny. The fact that you said business was perfect because me and Eric were talking about it earlier in the week.
I'm
talking about it every week. Well, I know, but I mean, so we specifically.
businessman.
Yeah,
too.
but we're
No
just like
clue.
just the way people don't treat it like a business, and that if you're supposed to make money, it's just
Come here for a second.
a matter of nobody approaching it like a business instead of approaching it like
Like
a fucking hobby or approaching it like a
backyard
fucking
fest.
backyard.
That's
fest.
what they treat it like.
That'd be funny. It's just in the middle of the show. Just randomly.
I do not.
No,
This is the new effing show, Jerry Lynn, and you're watching the Wrestling Roundtable.
Giddy up.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. If you want to share some of your experiences with independent wrestling or just want to talk about anything mixed martial arts or pro wrestling, call the Wrestling Roundtable radio show 347-857-4647 Tuesdays on blogtalkradio.com/Wrestling Roundtable. Joining the panel to my left, which is your right, is Orlando ONeill. He's a fan of 21 years, and you've been to a lot of independent shows and are a fan of indie wrestling, so I wanted to bring you on to get a fan's perspective too. But before we get to some of our favorite moments and matches in independent wrestling, something you hear a lot, mostly on the internet from Smart Marth, is support indie wrestling, support indie wrestling. And I know their intentions are in the right place, but don't you think that a flat statement like that, I don't know. There are some indies out there I don't necessarily want to support.
No, I agree
So,
with you.
as independent wrestlers, how do you feel about that?
The idea is great. It's wonderful because that should be the breeding ground for the talent that you eventually see as like the top guys. I mean, Punk right now is probably the best example that you have on TV, and Bryan are the two best examples you have on TV right now.
Now Claudio.
And now Claudio just got
Hey.
started, which I'm super excited for too. But with Punk and Bryan, they are at the top right now. And they came up through the independents, traveling the world, everywhere from coast to coast. And look how good they both are. That's the experience. That's the territory style experience that you get of wrestling in front of all those different fans, all those different towns, city. Like, no fan is the same. No crowd are you going to get the same reaction. One group of fans might want to see a technical match. The other ones might just want to see a bunch of Memphis stalling. And it gives you that well-rounded experience that I don't think I wouldn't know personally because I haven't been in the system, but I don't think you get that same experience from a developmental system.
But isn't there a big but in there? Because while there are Claudios and Danielsons, aren't there, like we just talked about with Grizzly Redwood, some of these...
You have your backyard indies,
right,
pretty much.
Like XPW used to be.
Well,
I don't want to support something
XPW,
like that.
they had their trained wrestlers, but they also had a bunch of like crappy backyard, ultra-violent,
Exactly.
hack and slash crap. It had its appeal, though. CCW had its appeal.
So
They
does
also
a car
changed.
crash.
True. I mean, but XPW probably kept to their poor appeal until they made it to Philly, and they started like nabbing old ECW guys and all the crap.
I guess I'd say Mex Pro now.
Yeah, probably. You also got the Barnyard Indies, which it's the truth. You know, you go into Central Pennsylvania.
He's from Iowa. He knows.
Hey, at least Iowa had some good pro wrestling to go along with them.
And corn.
And corn, too. You got to pick them. But needless to say, you have these Barnyard Indies where you have someone who knew a wrestler who taught somebody how to wrestle that taught a bunch of other people how to wrestle, and that person really didn't know a damn thing about wrestling psychology or how to perform moves or holds properly. So you have all these assholes having wrestling matches, working for absolutely nothing, and basically degenerating what an indie show is supposed to be like. When I was a kid, I went to IW Mid-South frequently. I went to NWA No Limits frequently. They had wrestlers like Aries, like Punk, Brian,
Hero.
Joe, Hero, Cabana, Ace Steel, so on and so forth. Those guys were wrestlers. They looked the part as wrestlers. They trained like athletes, which is one thing a lot of these barnyard, back-ass, dumbass wrestlers that think they are pro wrestlers don't do because they don't take it fucking seriously. And they embarrass people to go to indie fucking shows and want to put down money, $10, $15, $20, whatever it is, that they work their ass off on to spend money for their entertainment for the night. And they turn around and have a shit show down the line. They're going to turn away from pro wrestling. Okay, you may have Hillbilly Jim or Greg Valentine or whoever the hell it is that you may have watched back in the day at those shows, but everything up to see those shows is complete shit, and then you have the main event, which is also dog shit.
Well, how do you think the state of indies are now? Where I talked about how they really started forming after the territories. And we saw in the Monday Night War sort of time when wrestling itself was hot across the board. Everyone watched WCW, ECW, and WWF. So a lot of indies benefited from that because wrestling itself was hot. And I remember when Ring of Honor started in 2002, I remember thinking, okay, this will probably have all the big indie names at the time. So it was Danielson, SATs, Low Key, AJ Styles, all the usual suspects that I knew of back then, and it was great. But how do you think the state of indies are now? We saw a couple years ago Ring of Honor innovate the iPay-per-view market, and now everyone's jumping in on that and seemingly doing a better job with the broadcasting, I guess. But there's a lot of good wrestlers out there. But when I look back on, let's say, the glory days of Ring of Honor, when I look at guys like Samoa Joe, Low-Key, Danielson, I really don't get a feeling in terms of aura or presence, maybe even reputation and name on a lot of those guys that are around now. So how do you think the state of indie wrestling is? Is like everyone working together, some sort of sign? Well, like Chikara is the biggest whore, JPW, CZW, Evolve, Ring of Honor, they're with everybody. And that seems to happen in Japan too when business is down, people work together. Yeah. Is that some sort of indication, or are indies really cool because people seem to be still into it on the internet?
No, I just kind of think it's another evolution of pro wrestling in general. I mean, there have been plenty of times in history of wrestling where different companies have to work together, and I think that's what's going on right now. There aren't a lot of big stars like how they were during the glory days of indie wrestling with Samoa Joe and Bryan Danielson and CM Punk, so a lot of the guys have to come together to work together to make sure that there are good quality shows all over the country.
I was going to ask, because you guys were from out here, whereas me and him were in the Midwest during the big days, and indie wrestling always seemed like a bigger thing to me on this part of the country than it ever was in the Midwest.
That's because people live here.
But, like, how was it then, the feeling of, like, independent wrestling between, because I know at that point it was, like, JCW, I mean, ECWA.
Yeah.
The New York Feds.
New York Feds.
JPW.
Yeah, I had a JPW on a public access station. It was ran right in the town next to me that I live in, so I could just hop on the bus, go on Broadway in Bayonne and see
the Strong Style Thugs.
My first indie show was JPW 2002. The main event was Homicide, Steve Corino, and under that was American Dragon Low-Key in a submission match.
Okay.
Matt Stryker was on the show. Jay Lethal was 17. His mom was screaming like crazy on the show. It was great. That's what got me into independent wrestling.
Well, that's a really funny story because one of my favorite moments in independent wrestling is one that we went to, Jersey All Pro, back in 2006, and that was because Monty Brown was on the show. And he didn't have an opponent scheduled, but they brought out EC Negro, and of course I was there just to see Monty Brown, and I popped for the pounce, and that was great. It was just a lot of fun. So that's one of my favorite independent moments. What are yours?
My first spot show, it wasn't technically like an independent like JPW, CZW. Eddie Guerrero was wrestling on the show. This is during his tour to Independence. It was the night before he actually won the Intercontinental title against RVD, and he wrestled Crowbar in the main event. So being able to see Eddie Guerrero wrestle live was freaking awesome. And that show had a lot of great wrestlers. It was also the same night that Rocco Rock died.
Oh, wow.
That was his last match. He did a table spot, and they had Buff Bagwell, Brian Christopher. There's a lot of pretty big names, and it was a pretty good show.
That's what a lot of times indies use to draw people in. So if you see the local ad, I'll never forget one for NWA in New Jersey was The Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness, Viscera. What were some of your favorite independent moments? Maybe as a wrestler or as a fan?
Well, I'll go back as a fan because I think that's kind of important because we all are wrestling fans and we all want to look for quality wrestling to go and spend our money on. As a kid watching independent wrestling, Ring of Honor, I went there with my friends. We hacked out the money. We went and enjoyed the shows. What can I say? But Punk Joe 2 in Chicago, that was one of the funnest shows, funnest main events I've ever seen in my life. To this day, I talk to my friends, like, do you remember when we went to go see this and when we did that? Because a couple of my friends went on to be pro wrestlers afterwards, too. And so sometimes we think back and we reminisce those days.
A lot of this is intimate, personal experience, too. We just interviewed the Bravados on Tuesday, and I asked them about the idea of an intimate atmosphere. A lot of times that's spun around because it really is a euphemism for small building, but it can lead to some interesting experiences regardless of crowd size. I mean, WrestleMania in front of 78,000 people is great, but also that experience you can't replicate in the high school gym or the Armory. Yeah. And I remember I went to the Wayne Powell building, I believe it was, for Cyberspace Wrestling Federation, CSWF, in 2005 or so, when Vince Russo was retiring. Okay. There was a great Mana, the Samoan Madman or whatever, against Abyss. They had a hardcore match, which was awesome, but that's not even the moment. Russo came out to say, thank you, everybody, and goodbye, and blah, blah, blah. And first thing he said was, the first thing I want to say is, and I screamed, pudding! And you can hear it on the tape and everything. And that's the sort of thing, of course, to make my friend laugh, but that's just the sort of thing you can't really replicate at a WrestleMania. So do you have a favorite memory or moment?
Completely healing out this kid at his first Ring of Honor show. That's why I was laughing.
Oh.
I don't know if it's as a fan, if it's a specific moment so much as the idea itself. Because I remember that first indie show I went to was just the friendliness of the guys. There was none of that, I'm too good to talk to fans after the show. It was people were cool.
Was Loki at this show?
People were cool, and they just talked, like, after the show, as people would hang out. It was cool if you hung out. Guys would come out, talk to the fans that were standing around, and just asking questions of, like, how did you get into this, blah, blah, blah. I met one guy who actually took us to a ring and, like, just showed us a little, minimal.
Right.
Just a little bit of an idea, and he was a nice guy. That same experience then carrying over when I met these people firsthand as I got into wrestling, and telling Jimmy Jacobs, and he was like the fifth match I had in IWA Mid-South, and just telling him, hey, I was at that show in Lansing when you wrestled X, Y, and Z, and having the two completely different pieces of my life, fan and wrestler, correlate together like that, that's something I find special about indie wrestling.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw American Dragon. He wasn't Bryan Danielson. He was just announced as American Dragon. Was at the Jersey Championship Wrestling J-Cup in 2002 at the Rexplex. And during the tournament, one of the wrestlers who already competed, he sat in the bleachers with me and was just bullshitting. So that's the sort of thing you were talking about. But what about the matches? Because there's got to be some that stuck with you and made an impression. Obviously, Samoa Joe and Punk too. There's got to be tons of ECW and Ring of Honor ones. But I'd like to hear some of the more not known, like the ones that only you would have seen with a crowd of another 100 people or so. What were some of your favorite independent matches?
Another IWA one, Punk and Aries from Ted Petty, 2004. Match was ridiculously awesome. I saw one of the matches like previously, and I was like, yeah, okay. I knew they were good, but I never thought that it would live up to the hype. And when they had this rematch, obviously another place, it was fucking fantastic. It was awesome. So it just kind of like stood out in my mind. Two guys I've watched in other places, they can go anywhere else and have fantastic wrestling matches.
My first Jersey All Pro show, low-key in American Dragon, because I remember reading a PWI magazine about the ECWA Super 8 tournament, and they were in the finals, and then I saw...
That was a pretty famous match, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then I was like, holy crap, they're going to be wrestling on that Bayonne show. I got to go to Bayonne to check these guys out. And they put on a freaking amazing match. Low-key went over, and it was just hard, stiff, great technical wrestling that I wasn't used to. It was 2002. The NWO was coming back, so, you know, it was a great alternative to pro wrestling. Ring of Honor was just starting up. TNA was just starting up. That sticks out of my mind.
That was like the golden years for indies, like I was kind of alluding to before, at least in my opinion. And around that time, I was going to a lot of Phoenix Championship Wrestling shows, which was run by Donnie B, Nova's brother, Nova from ECW, of course. And he was running a lot of shows with, big surprise, Nova. And he had a bunch of good matches, actually. One was the day before the first Ring of Honor show. It was February 22nd in Toms River at the rec station. And it was Eddie Guerrero on the steroid tour. It was Nova and Eddie Guerrero. That was a really good main event. But also Jerry Lynn and Nova had a really good match in New Jersey that year, too. But the first time I remember seeing the Briscoes was on a tape of Stretched in Smyrna, 2001, I believe. It was the SATs, which was both Maximos and Red, against Rick Blade, I believe, and the Briscoes. And you see a bunch of, at the time, lanky, skinny kids doing shit from No Mercy, I guess. But this six-man tag was fucking off the charts. When you read, like, wow, this guy does a standing shooting star, you're like, wow, I gotta see that.
Those styles, too, are completely contrasting to what you saw on television, too. So that's, I think, another reason why people gravitate to independent wrestling, because the styles are different. You see, like, people are like, oh, bring back cruiserweights or whatever. Those sorts of style matches are very akin to those matches, and you enjoy watching those matches, so you seek out those matches if you're open-minded, of course.
Like I alluded to with Ring of Honor, there's tons. I could make a whole list of just Bryan Danielson matches themselves, but also, of course, Samoa Joe, Aries, and Loki, and those sort of guys. But what were some of your favorite matches in independent wrestling?
A lot of the ones that had come to mind are ones that I filmed for in a brief period where I was working as a camera guy. Chris Daniels and Austin Aries from the Super 8. There was one, and it's not so much the match itself, it's just that I was standing there at ringside. JPW show. Samoa Joe, Vader, Mike Awesome, and Dan Moff. I'm forgetting the teams, how the teams broke up, but it was a tag match with those four that I was filming. It was in June of 2004, and it was just one of those, this is crazy. I'm standing here watching this match in front of me. Being from Michigan, I saw him a lot. It was Jimmy Jacobs refereeing a match with Tommy Rich. And Tommy Rich was just bloody mess, going crazy, throwing chairs. It was just intense and insane to watch. NWA Great Lakes, maybe. There was a million NWAs in Michigan that lasted like one or two shows. Was it World 1 or 01? They were doing a show at the arena in 2004. Adaka was on the show. Masato Tanaka was on the show. Just being there live to see those guys wrestle was just such an awesome experience.
And so was having you guys, including Grizzly Redwood, and of course you too, Orlando, on to talk about independent wrestling. So thank you very much for our all-wrestler panel. And we're going to move on next to talk about one of the big wrestlers of our lifetime, the career of The Undertaker, when we come back.